All right, I want to do a little bit of a test. Let's see. A little bit of a test. Raise your hand if you believe that you deserve God's favor. Okay. Raise your hand. Yeah, that's what I thought. I was like, something's not right. Raise your hand if you deserve, you've earned God's blessings. Raise your hand if he owes you. And why do we live like that? Or we talked about yesterday in our men's retreat, how difficult it is to give God credit for all the things he gives us. Credit for all the blessings he shares with us. Credit for all the gifts he has given us. And yet, you look at the world, even his church, and how easily, it's doing it again, I know. And how easily, though, we give God credit when something evil happens. We recognize his control, or lack thereof, when something bad happens and evil takes place. Lord, if even Neil deGrasse Tyson, when he talks about God, he's either all-powerful or he's loving, but he can't be both. Because if he was, this would be a very different world, wouldn't it? Either he's a loving God, but he just doesn't have the power to change the situation. Or he's all-powerful, but he's not loving, because he doesn't use that power to do that which is good. And now you're like, you guys love the Lord. You know he's all-powerful and he's love. You're like, Neil, wrong again. It's not true. He is all-loving and all-powerful. However, welcome to the Christian life of paradox, that he shows that power and he shows that love in ways that are not our ways, ways that we're not accustomed to. Even Ty, I'm not trying to pick on you. We talked about it this past week, right? That the Lord used the greatest injustice to have ever occurred in the world. A perfect man dying for enemies and sinners. The greatest evil to have ever happened, he used to accomplish the greatest good that this world has ever known. That he can be all-powerful and all-loving at the same time. That even when we suffer, even when there's a cost, even when there's a risk, that there's a great blessing. That he gives us gifts. He gives us blessings that we do not deserve, that we have not earned. And he has given us those gifts for a reason. Our spouses, our children, our jobs, our homes, even the bosses that won't leave us alone, our neighbors that always need to know what we're up to, the person that is riding our bumper behind us when we're already going 15 over the speed limit. That doesn't happen to you? I don't know. Okay. Maybe that's just me. I was even on the shoulder. Goodness. Okay. Sorry. When all that happens, all those things, it sounds paradoxical that suffering can even be used for good, that even those things can be considered a gift from the Lord, and how we are to use those to care for the vulnerable, those who are outsiders, those who have been in situations that are in situations similar to ours. I do not like that cancer exists. And yet I have been able to see the Lord move in unique ways that I would not have seen done if either of those individuals had not had cancer. I've seen the Lord move, and we're going to see it in Ruth, where the loss of a spouse, the loss of a loved one, the loss of a job, the loss of something that was near and dear to us, somehow the Lord used to bring us closer to Him and to minister to others. That we would see the finding favor in the eyes of the Lord, that we would see that as an endeavor, not so we're on the Lord's good side, or just so the Lord likes me and that's all that matters. As long as He likes me, we're good. But that we would take the favor, take the blessings, take the resources that He gives us, and see that they were never just for us, but they are to be bestowed on other people. And I think if nowhere else, we should see it all the more in the church. And it's a sad reality that the one place that it would always happen, the one place that it would be thriving and advertised and shown in full light, is one of the deadest, darkest, absent places I see us moving. And so what I see in this passage, I see a message for us. A message for us that in this broken and sinful world, there are vulnerable people outside, vulnerable people out there that are searching for a kindness, and they are in desperate need of favor. Vulnerable people out there that need a kindness that they are to find. I'm so sorry that they don't. That they are to find among God's covenant people. And that when the outsiders see the kindness that is given to them by God's people, it provokes them to hope in God, and then the outsiders become insiders. We see in the first 3 verses that this is a sad, broken, sinful world. I know that I'm made in God's image because the things that outrage us outrage Him. If we're bothered by it, it's because He's bothered by it. If we have a sense of morality, a sense of right and wrong, it's because He gave it to us. And so when we see the vulnerability, our hearts go out to people that are suffering and the victims of a sad, fallen world. They are looking for kindness, searching for favor. I mean, goodness, I remember my school was in downtown Chicago. I mean, homeless people, they couldn't even look me in the eye to ask me for something to eat, pointing to the sign they had written on a piece of cardboard. Because the thought, it's almost like they're dehumanized. Feed me like another one of your pets. They couldn't even look me in the eye. I couldn't look them in the eye either. I just kept walking. If I just don't look at them, they're not really there. And what we have here, as I waltzed off the train back to take my next class on the goodness of God and sharing His love with those who don't deserve it and those who are the lowest in society. I wish I had Ruth chapter 2 verses 1 through 3. Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him, in whose sight I shall find favor." And she said to her, "Go, my daughter." So she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. We talked last week about this is the period during the Judges. There's serious spiritual, moral decline. And those who suffer greatly are those without options, those who have no opportunities, those who greatly depend on someone or something outside of themselves for provision and protection. There is no king to appeal to. You are on your own. Survival of the fittest. And that even in the promised land, a widow sojourning faces the same hardship and risk. And then here we know of Boaz. We're introduced to who's this guy Boaz. There's some sort of family obligation. We learn that, hey, he's from the family of Elimelech. That's Naomi's deceased husband. But we find Ruth taking the initiative to go find food for herself and for her mother-in-law. She's being proactive, which is pretty astonishing. We talked about her ethnicity. We've talked about her gender. We talked about her social rank. And I love this, as opposed to using those as excuses. I don't know. I'm from a different country. I don't know. I'm a woman. I don't know. I'm pretty poor. She's like, I need to eat. My mother needs to eat. And I'm going to work with what I'm given. She knew that she was at risk of being rejected, especially Israel being at its lowest in the sense of its hospitality and humanitarian efforts. They are doing what is right in their own eyes. They are far from the Lord. This is the worst time and the worst place to have to depend on Israel for love and kindness and generosity. And then here, we learn about, there's the Hebrew word lakat, which just means to pick up or to gather. You can even think about one day when the Lord will gather his people, he will lakat them. And then gleaning is different than just, harvesting. To glean is you get the leftovers. You're gleaning what is left behind after the harvest. Everyone goes through, and if there's some heads of grain that are left over, then that's what you get to keep. This is what happens when you're essentially a resident alien, if you will. You're a foreigner, you're fatherless, or you're a widow. Here Naomi's like, well, at least check two of the boxes. I'm a foreigner, I'm a widow. I get to glean. And at least the leftovers will be of something of nourishment to me. But this is Naomi's encouragement in verse 2. I mean, you can imagine, like, oh, good, we actually have a chance. Ruth says to Naomi, let me go to the field, glean among the ears of grain after him, in whose sight I shall find favor. Naomi's like, go, my daughter, go at once. Go get us something to eat. This is our best chance. It's interesting that in chapter 1, we talked about Naomi's like, I'm bitter. I have no favor in the eyes of the Lord. He doesn't notice me. He doesn't care about me. But then here we find the Lord's sovereign grace is not merely a circumstance, but here Ruth is able to happen upon a field that is Boaz's and is a relative. And we learn something unique about Boaz's generosity. That when after she set out, went and gleaned in the field after the reapers, she happened to come to the part of the field that belonged to Boaz, the clan of Elimelech. She is in his field. And we're going to look a little bit about how he finds out about that. But I often think, who's this type of person? Oftentimes like the idea of gleaning, and maybe this is how I was raised. You eat everything that was on your plate. If you drop something, 5-second rule. And then maybe you even hear when Jesus fed the 5,000, waste not a bit. So something like this idea of gleaning, leaving leftovers behind, it's something different. The idea that you're harvesting your grain, and if you're not able to harvest it all, you leave it. I don't know. Like, I would be like, no, I got to go back. I got to get what we missed, because waste not a bit. But we see here the Lord's provision for those who didn't own property, for those who were fatherless, those who were foreigners, and those who were widows. Do not gather the leftovers. And so Boaz is the man that is not so worried about his harvest, his field, his income. That's like, no, the Lord will provide for us with what we've been able to harvest, and that will be enough. It reminds me of a story that was told about Alexander the Great's generosity. The story is told that one time a beggar came along the roadside where he was traveling and asked for alms from Alexander the Great when he passed by. The man was poor, he was wretched, he had no claim upon the ruler, no right to even lift a hand against him. It was a wonder he was even talking to the great Alexander the Great. And yet the emperor threw him several gold coins. Courtier was astonished at his generosity, and he said, "Sir, copper coins would have adequately met a beggar's need. Why give him gold?" Alexander the Great responded in royal fashion, "Copper coins would suit the beggar's need, but gold coins suit Alexander the Great's giving." What a line. I hope that's true. I don't know, but it makes the king look really good. I hope it's true. And here Boaz, a wonderful figure that we only know by name right now. He has a field specifically dedicated to those who pass through Bethlehem. Like, it's the fact that Ruth even knew ahead of time, hey, there's a field specifically for people like me, that I can go and glean from the leftovers. And I think God blessed Boaz, not just because there was something special in him, not because Boaz just had the right stature or the right personality or the right talk, but I think he was blessed because he was so generous. He understood that this field, the rain, the seed, the workers, the harvest, none of it is mine in the first place. Everything I have is what God has given to me. And so I'm going to give it back to him. How can I hoard onto something that's not even mine in the first place? And so I think as believers, we learn a lot from Boaz. We learn about our God and his example, that we need to take an inventory. And that's what we really worked on yesterday. Taking an inventory of what God has entrusted to us, whether it's material assets like money or our homes or our food, or immaterial like our time and our energy and our advantages, whether they're social or economic. And we need to ask, what are the specific areas of influence? What areas do we have a unique responsibility in which we might be able to steward what God has given us for his glory and our neighbor's good? One of my favorite things about us having a missions ministry team, well, actually even one of my favorite aspects of the first leadership meeting I attended, was that when we looked at the budget, we saw a set of funds, and our first thought was, we need to spend it, but I don't want to spend it here. That is amazing. That the first thought was not what we can do with it, but what does God want us to use with it? And it doesn't have to be here in our building. I know this is not always the easiest thing to do. I don't take that lightly, what I actually saw, because I've been a part of other churches where you were just every penny, nickel and dime, holding on to it like it's what we've earned. But however, humbly identifying that these resources are God's and that they are only given to us so we might invest them in His priorities. Essentially, that we would see the outsiders among us that are so craving a glance, eye contact, remembering that they're real and that they are not to be swept under the rug, that they are made in God's image, and that He might be using us and our gifts to help in whatever way that might be. Second, bigger chunk. Vulnerable people, they deserve kindness. They deserve love because they're made in God's image. They deserve our notice. And I think that favor, I think that kindness they seek should be found in God's people. I am saddened, I am hurt by so many people that I've talked to, and the church is the last place they would go to for help. That's the place I go if I want to be judged. That's the place I go if I want to feel bad about myself. That's the place I go if I want to be reminded of all the things I've messed up, screwed up, all the bridges I've burned. And now this is a misapplication. But even how I'm even wrong God. And now God won't even love me unless I do X, Y, and Z. So I don't want to get carried away with that. But we're like, no, right? The church is like the one place that we want anyone to feel loved, valued, deserving of our attention and respect. That's what Boaz does. He's introduced as a worthy man. Verse 4, behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem. He said to the reapers, the Lord be with you. And they answered, the Lord bless you. I don't know if you're your own boss, you might have to talk to the man in the mirror or the lady in the mirror. But if you're not your own boss, goodness, it'd be nice if you had a boss that would come in, Monday morning, and he's like Boaz. The Lord be with you. You're like, who is this guy? But that you have such a great relationship that you can be like, the Lord be with you. That you enjoy being around your boss. He's a nice, godly leader. She's a kind woman that respects you, cherishes you, understands that every single person is a part of the team, that every person has a unique job, that our goal cannot be accomplished if we don't have each and every part working to the best of their ability with smiles on their faces. That's not how we usually feel with our bosses, even those who've retired. When you think back to who your bosses were, I hope you had good ones. But normally 9 times out of 10, you come back from vacation, you realize the place didn't burn down without you. You realize that so-and-so who you've come to know and to enjoy having lunch with, just how easily replaceable they are because they can no longer meet the demands of the job. And then you go, well, we don't have that much different. We have a lot in common. There's not much difference between us. So I guess I'm next. When's my time to get chopped? But that's not how these workers are with Boaz. He shows up and he loves them. He's kind to them. They understand they want the same blessing to be on him. Because we know if the Lord blesses you, you're going to bless us. We have a great working environment. Then he even says in verse 5 to his young men who was in charge of the reapers, whose young woman is this? The servants who were in charge of the reapers answered, she is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. And then she says, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers. So she came, and she has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. When you get into bigger corporations, sometimes you're like, I'm just another cog in the machine. No one notices me. What if I just didn't show up to work today? Is anyone even going to notice? Do they know what I do? This lack of purpose, lack of meaning, feeling undervalued and underappreciated. That doesn't happen with Boaz. He is such a good steward of his material blessings, his field, his workers, the water that he eventually gives to Ruth, and even his immaterial resources. He shows up on the job. He doesn't stay in the office. He's not like the foreman that just, no offense to foremen that stay on their phone in the truck all day, but he's a working foreman. He comes out to see how everyone is doing. He cares. He even notices, hey, young lady, I don't think I've seen you here before. Who's that working over there? She's new. He pays attention to detail. And it's amazing that we see in a world, a country right now, that where they were all doing what was right in their own eyes, Boaz is doing what is right in God's eyes. That in verse 8, he says to Ruth, now listen, my daughter. Listen, my daughter. I can't imagine how she heard those words. Just the instant respect that she was received, just by how he referred to her. Not, you're new. I don't recognize you. I don't know who you are. Where are you from? What are you doing? I don't know you. It's almost like, perfect. This field was made just for people like you. Wonderful. My daughter, do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping. Go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? She was working in a field, and he's like, you know what? There's an even better one, where you won't have to worry about men catcalling you. Worry about them coming up and maybe taking something if you want to go to the bathroom, go get something to eat, and then they take everything you've harvested. Go to the field with my young women. Community. Get acquainted. Meet other people around your age that you can know and have a community and glean there in a field made just for you. Go and deserve and enjoy the best. I have a field allocated just for people like you. That way you don't have to glean, but you may harvest. It is amazing that he expresses a concern, even though that she's an immigrant. He knows that she is not native to this land. He recognizes that. He understands that. But he also understands that her love for her mother-in-law is testimony to the type of person that she is. Verse 12, he blesses her and says that the Lord would repay her for what she has done with her mother-in-law, and that a full reward would be given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. I mean, it's beautiful. It's just beautiful. I don't know. Sometimes it's just like, that's all I have to say. It's beautiful to actually see a member of God's church. Not that I haven't seen it before. It's amazing when you see a Christian doing Christian things. It's beautiful. And so Boaz counters Ruth's amazement like, why are you even noticing that I'm in your field? I'm a foreigner. I'm a sojourner. Why are you even looking at me? He counters her amazement with his kindness, giving her water, giving her a field, giving her blessings, even going further to offer her a meal. And we really don't have time to go into the symbolism of, they have bread, she dips the bread into a morsel of wine, communion, go back and do more study. It's amazing, God's covenant love shown in Boaz. But there'll be more Bible study later. But he is not a mercy minimalist. He gives her a wonderful field, gives her water, brings her in for lunchtime, gives her wonderful food that she even gets to take the leftovers home to Naomi with after everything that she has gathered and the mealtime. And I think, that's what I meant yesterday, Ken, when I was thinking about the men's retreat and how this ties in to what we're going to talk about tomorrow, i.e. today, about Boaz being a godly man. Him taking responsibility, accountability. He takes responsibility as a man in authority, but he does so in light of his more foundational identity as a man under authority. That he takes an authority that has been given to him, that he must manage what the Lord gives him in a godly way. He understands that he has received unmerited favor. And so when he sees people like Ruth, he sees himself. That I don't deserve this, so I'm going to give it to them. Because if God can give it to me and I don't deserve it, then I can give it to others when they don't deserve it. This reminds me of maybe when you think about when you go to your doctor, you do an annual checkup, he or she will often, unfortunately, poke or prod and press in various places on your body, and they'll ask all this time, does this hurt? How about this? And then you cry out in pain, and then one or two things happens, right? Either the doctor, they pushed too hard, they didn't have the right sensitivity, or more likely there's something wrong. And the doctor's going to say, all right, we need to do more tests because it's not supposed to hurt there. And I think this is what happens when pastors preach on financial responsibility or the giving of time, resources, energy. One of two things happens. Either the members cry out in discomfort and they criticize the message and the messenger. And so either the pastors push too hard, and I'm trying not to do that, that's why I'm doing the story, or perhaps there's something wrong. And in that case, we say, friend, we need a great physician because it's not supposed to hurt there. And so I think, unfortunately, I know too many Christians who they hold their pocketbooks too loosely in the pursuit of worldly goods, and then we hold it too tightly when it comes to giving to God and others. And not even just our pocketbooks, but our time, our energy, giving the Lord our first fruits. Not making excuses for, well, I am tired. I haven't gotten enough sleep. I don't have enough energy. I don't have enough money. I don't know. I have so much on my plate, and I think if I add another thing, I'm just going to lose it. Then maybe the Lord's telling us that we have to budget and maybe cut out some things in our diet so the plate can hold what it should hold. Boaz understood that his blessings originated in God's unmerited favor. They were to be used for his enjoyment, yes, but also for his neighbor's good. And so I think as those that proclaim the gospel, we should be astonishing the world, surprising the world with the favor that we show to at-risk people, those who don't deserve it, especially those among our own local community. And then lastly, this is just a summarization of why we should be doing all of that. Why look at outsiders? You sound like a jerk if you say we shouldn't. But why do we look at outsiders? Why should we show them kindness? Well, when we give them kindness, when God's people show them love that they know they don't deserve, no one deserves it. But that when we give them favor, we show them kindness, we show them love, it provokes them to have hope, to hope in God, and to perhaps even become an insider. Boaz shows Ruth tremendous favor. You can imagine Ruth retelling Naomi everything that had happened that day. Naomi, you aren't going to believe this. I know the odds were against us. Who would have thought? I got to glean in the field of Boaz. Not just on the fringes, but any of its parts. I actually got to have my own field where I had protection from men. I could get water whenever I wanted to drink. I could glean from the field itself. I have all this barley. I even have leftovers from our lunchtime meal. Isn't it amazing? Naomi gets excited, and I think this was the first time in a long time that she's able to get a twinkle in her eye, where we see even later on in verse, verse 20, Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead." Naomi also said to her, "The man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers." It is beautiful. To clarify a redeemer, we think about Jesus as being a redeemer, and he is. At the time, it just was a term for a close relative who, among other things, would act on behalf of another family member in financial difficulty. In short, Naomi's like, Boaz is our saving grace. He is our one shred of hope. And I think this is the most profound statement that will be made today. Believe it or not, you can argue with it, but I think it is. Everything in the Christian life originates with knowing God. We talked about that yesterday too. Everything in the Christian life originates with knowing God. In order to accomplish what this passage demands, I believe we need to be constantly growing in our knowledge of God. God's people do not reflect God's character because they do not know it, and they do not know Him. When I see churches that are faltering on what the Word says, they don't know the Lord. When I see a church that has forgotten its mission, they don't know the Lord of their mission. When I see people that are looking at the blessings and the gifts that God has given them, and they forget that God has given them, they don't get it. When we look at Boaz's conduct, it is shaped by what he knows about God. He does what he did. We're enamored by his example. How could a man be like this? How could he be so generous? Our answer should be, it's so simple. It's because he's a Christian. That's why it's so easy for him. That's why he gets it. It's because he's a Christian. No brainer. New covenant Christians, we know even more about God's salvation than he did. He is ages and centuries before Christ was even born. And yet he shows the love of Christ so vividly. That God's kindness to vulnerable people comes in its clearest expression in Jesus, who we'll see is from the lineage of David, and David's great-grandmother, Ruth. Makes sense. So I think to close, when we think of God showing his loving kindness towards his people, toward his promise, this passage shows us how we are to deal kindly with one another after his example. instead of making all the excuses for why that homeless gentleman was in the situation that he was in, would it have killed me to go into the subway that he was sitting in front of and get him a sandwich? In a world in which most are doing what is right in their own eyes, God calls and equips us to be the instruments of His blessing. A question asking, what's in it for me, is a question that we should not be asking when God calls us to do something. God's purpose in being kind to His people is to make us kind. Jesus identified with weak sinners. He impoverished Himself in order to enrich us. Why can we not do the same? The thing is, unlike Boaz and Ruth, Jesus didn't merely give us bread, but He is our bread. He welcomes us to His table. He nourishes us with His own body and His blood. He pardoned our sin through His sacrifices on the cross. Never has the world seen a more scandalous vulnerability or kindness than in Christ. And yet we, who each and every Sunday, each and every day, get to talk and sing and read and praise the wonderful blessings of God. We sing, "How great Thou art." And it just stays in this room. We keep it for ourselves. The gifts, we see ourselves as the end of God's giving. Boaz was a worthy man, yes, but Jesus is the worthiest of them all. None more noble, none more gentle, none more dignifying or kind. And yet in all of His vulnerability, He is able to offer us refuge under His wings, that we might be transformed into the instruments of His kindness towards others, all for His glory. Amen.